4 billion years ago, when life started on this planet, the world looked very different. Volcanoes were active, belching into the atmosphere a mixture of carbon dioxide and sulfur. These gases would have colored the sky red. Blue-green algae dominated the planet. They used the energy from the sun and combined it with the gases in the atmosphere to make food. But as they spread over the planet, these algae produced this new gas, oxygen. Levels in the atmosphere slowly rose from almost nothing to over 20% and turned the sky blue. But for early life, oxygen was a major hazard because oxygen is a highly explosive reactive gas. One man who knows just how dangerous it can be is pyrotechnics specialist Malcolm Armstrong.
Oxygen is one of the most reactive gases on planet Earth. Chemical explosions require two components, fuel and oxygen.
Here, Malcolm fills a tube with a little fuel and a little oxygen.
Fire.
The effect is underwhelming. Now, keep the same amount of fuel and increase the oxygen.
I've put 300 times the amount of oxygen in here.
And it becomes a very different story. Oxygen is dangerous. Two and a half billion years ago, oxygen would have killed most of the life forms it came in contact with. But one microbe found a way of harnessing the explosive power of this gas. It's called a mitochondrion. Each mitochondrion became a miniature power station. What followed next was one of the most important steps in the history of life on this planet, and is perhaps the most vital clue of all as to why we age. Two of the many single cells joined forces. The tiny power plant, one of the mitochondria, was absorbed into another primitive cell. Life on Earth changed forever. Today, mitochondria live inside the cells of every living creature. An expert in molecular biology, John Byrne, is fascinated by our relationship with this early organism.
Most people have never heard the word mitochondria, and yet the cells in my brain that are thinking of these words and the cells in my tongue that are helping to form them get their energy from mitochondria.
Every living creature on this planet has mitochondria within their cells. They are the power plants that fuel all life, including us.
They're like millions of tiny batteries. And when it was first suggested that mitochondria might once have been free-living bacteria, it seemed almost impossible to believe.
These ancient bacteria really are everywhere. For example, in the tails of sperm. A new laser scanning microscope allows us to see for the first time how individual sperm are powered by mitochondria. They are the glowing section in the tail that propel the sperm in their frantic journey to fertilize the egg. And it's the same story with eggs. They're so densely packed with mitochondria that under the laser they glow like the sun. Mitochondria are the power sources that will drive the growth spurt to build a new human. Our every movement is powered by them. And our every breath brings them the oxygen they need. But there's a heavy cost. With every breath, we age. Life-giving oxygen is slowly killing us. Because oxygen isn't just explosive, it's corrosive. When oxygen touches pure iron, it starts a chemical reaction that turns it to rust. This nail, turned rusty by exposure to oxygen, has been eaten away. And if oxygen can do this to metal, just imagine what it can do to your body.
It seems almost unbelievable that we're sitting here in 20% oxygen, breathing it, depending on it, and yet that same oxygen inside our body is actually doing damage. It's like rusting us from the inside. If you think about it, the atmosphere should probably have a health warning.
The trouble is that it's not just oxygen that's corrosive. So are its byproducts. Inside the mitochondria, most of the oxygen we breathe is transformed into life-giving energy. But not all. Some oxygen degrades into particles called free radicals. The trade-off, more power but more damage, intrigues biologists like Gordon Lithgow.
Mitochondria is really like an alien invader. It's a bit of a pact with the devil. We get from the mitochondria lots of cheap free energy, but also it's possible we get aging. The mitochondria are a bit like a nuclear power station in your back garden. Lots of cheap free energy, but highly toxic byproducts that have to be managed.
Once released, free radicals can damage any part of any cell in the body. Worst of all, they strike at the genes at the heart of every cell. So what's the proof that this battering inside leads to the decay we know as aging? Forensic pathologist Dick Shepherd sees the signs of oxygen and free radical damage almost every working day.
We see damage caused by oxygen in almost every body that we examine. It's present at a cellular level, but we see it with the naked eye in the brain and the heart and the lungs. The lungs are the first point at which the atmospheric oxygen reaches into the body. Passes through tiny little spaces that are lined by single layers of cells into the bloodstream. But of course these cells, although they are there to transport the oxygen, are also particularly vulnerable. And this is normal lung, smooth surface, big blood vessel running down the middle of it. There are no holes, there are no abnormalities.
A lifetime of exposure to pollutants like smoking will change that. Tobacco smoke dramatically increases the production of free radicals in the body, leading to cancer and other lung disorders. In this lung, the damage is obvious. The damage done by free radicals can also be seen in other organs.
Cardiovascular disease, that's disease of the heart and the blood vessels, is the #1 killer throughout the world.
As it circulates, blood carries oxygen and free radicals round the body. Over time, they can damage artery walls. Combined with cholesterol, this leads to furring up of important blood vessels.
This is the inside of the aorta, the biggest blood vessel of the body. A thin, smooth tube, a perfect vessel for the transport of blood. And this is what an aorta that's got severe fatty deposits looks like. The fat has been affected by the oxidation and formed this rancid butter, which had caused weakening of the wall. The fatty deposition starts in our 20s, but it may be 40 years or so until the effects become obvious to the individual. The brain is about 2% of the weight of the human body, but consumes about 20% of the oxygen. And we're all worried about the effects of dementia as we get older. And we do know that the brain cells are particularly susceptible to the toxic effects of oxygen.
A young brain glows with huge numbers of mitochondria. But as time goes by, the free radicals produced by the enormous energy demands of the brain begin to kill the mitochondria. One by one, the batteries fail. And so does our brain. Memory becomes impaired, and thinking becomes confused.
When we dissect brains, we can sometimes see those changes.
Old brains show extensive signs of free radical damage. In some brains, like this one, the damage is greatest amongst the cells that control movement. Normal brains have a healthy dark line of these specialist cells. But in the brain on the right, the dark cells are no longer visible. They have been destroyed by the products of oxygen.
Given that we know the effects of oxygen, it's not a surprise that we age or we grow old. What is surprising, though, is that we actually live so long and remain so healthy.
The link between oxygen and aging helps explain a curious observation made over 100 years ago. The observation that most animals have a fixed number of heartbeats in their lifetime, around 1 billion. A shrew lives life in the fast lane. Its heart skips along at 500 beats a minute, using up all its heartbeats in less than 4 years. By contrast, an elephant's heart pumps a leisurely 30 times a minute. It can live up to 80 years. And a tortoise like Harriet, with a very low resting heart rate, just goes on and on. The more you rush around, the more oxygen you need, and the more free radicals you produce. and more free radicals means more damage. If free radicals are the main reason why we age, then perhaps we should be looking at ways to reduce the amount we produce.